Hello. So after we last time covered the theory, what's the major idea behind the Wedgeshop, I would like to start today with different approaches in terms of logic and UI and how to just make the first mock-ups inside Nuke visible. So the first thing was to make myself a couple of thoughts about what kind of objects do I need to create wedges or different variations. So I needed some objects which are holding the actual node, the knob itself, maybe the default value of the knob, and then of course a list of values I would like to iterate. In this case, hey, let's say I want to change the values from 1 to 10 or 1 to 110, it doesn't matter. And I need to have an object which stores these values just as a range or as specific values. So I made a quick graph just to visualize this a little bit better. So the yellow ones are just the ones inside Nuke, and the other one are fairly independent of Nuke. So they can just develop first, and so I did as you see later. So the first thing again is to just get the knob from the specific node and the default value. Then you would need some kind of user interface to interact, of course, to add this kind of knobs, and also to hold the different values would the user wishes to wedge through. In this case, as example, like 10, 20, 30. And I call this very object a variant. So the variant is nothing else than the node, and the knob specified, as well as the range, an array of values I would like to iterate through, but just one single knob. So this is just to interact with the user. Then later on I got the main Wedgeshop object, which can add and remove there's a typo, which can add and remove these variants to the shop itself and create variations out of it. And variations is very similar to variant, but the difference is that it doesn't have an array as value, it has one specific value, like in this case a blur size 10. And from this variant I would have later on 3 variations. So, and I need from these variations, from this whole, let's say I have 3 knobs, 3 values, I have 3 by 3 by 3, 27 variations. I need to find different combinations possible without having the same variant twice in this kind of combination, and create a wedge out of it. So I just try to display it here, and the wedge would be all the knob values set and then render out an image. So this is this very set of settings or knob values at the end which I would like to see. So it's a little bit stacked on top of that. So yeah, the Wedgeshop can do those, so it can create variations out of variants and then create wedges once we decide to go, and then set it back to Nuke, loop through the wedges, set the values and render those, and of course, if desired, revert back to the default value of all the knobs. So that's the theory. That's the object I would like to write, and I did already. So I started without any Nuke, so I started just in PyCharm to set up those objects and have a little play to make sure that all these combination thingy works, since I noticed that it's actually not that straightforward as I thought, but after you find a solution, it is fairly easy. So I do have why can't I click that? Anyhow, so I got different variations. So sorry, I'm back. I had some issues with the software. So these are the objects we have seen in the diagram first. So the variant is very basic. It just has some properties. It's maybe over the top a little bit, but I would like to have this set up singly or like in a separate way, so I can extend and change it afterwards. Just make sure I have those properties in place, so I can change the logic below, but still can just access these values from the Wedgeshop later on. So fairly straightforward. The variation, again, very similar. It just holds the node, knob, and the value. Later on it might end up with a starting frame. That's something for later on, how to create the values between. And the Wedgeshop itself, which is also not too complicated. And after playing around a little bit, I found that the solution was Ethertool's product to this whole combination thing. After I tried to make it manually and had quite some hard time with some if, else, and all these kind of issues, and then I found out that the Ethertools does exactly that, what I need to do, and I had a play already. So I started with this data module just to make sure that this logic works. So I do have the variants. I just can create simple ones. I don't need Nuke for that, and I create a Wedgeshop, add those variants to the shop, and then let's just hit play and see what's happening here. So does that? Okay, so it does something. So what I do is I just have the shop, I create the wedges, and then I just loop through those wedges and print those. So I have the variation objects here, nothing too fancy, and if I want to see the values, so right now I have 3 wedges, which if I check variant A and B, so I have just a single value in A and 3 in B, so I have 1, 2, 3, so this adds up. So let's quickly check for the values. So this is multiplied 12, 11, then multiplied 12, 44, and 12, 25. So this seems to work, at least at this kind of stage. So let's add in the D, so we don't have this super bunch of it. So this would be 3 and multiplied by 5, so it would be 15 wedges in total. And let's just run this real quick. I think my screen record has some hard times on the same time. So yeah, so I have 15 wedges. You see here different variations, 1, 2, 3, since we have 3 layers of variants. So I need to have 3 different variations inside. It's not allowed to have, like in this case, the switch have twice 2 variations inside, like with 1 and with 2. It doesn't make sense in this case. So it needs to make sure that each level, like in this case, or a level variant, has just a single value happening per wedge. So, but this seems fine, and now I have just add another 7 on top, and just include this variant Z, add on top, let it run, and see I have 105 wedges. And as you can see, it's fairly fast happening that we explode in the numbers in terms of count. So it's very important that you understand that even if you just have 4 variants, depending on the value list, it can increase numbers fairly fast. Alright, so this seems to do the trick. So the combinations were all fine. If you check here, it's 25.94, so it's 1225.0. So it goes at the very step, it takes the first entry of the first list, the first of the second, first of the third and fourth, and then it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it just iterates through all those in the different combinations, and the very last one is 12, 25.9, and 5. So let's then talk about the user interface. So this is the logic behind the Wedgeshop. So this seems to work. So then we need an interface. So I thought about to go with Python panels, sitting on a putting it on a gizmo or something else, but at the end I decided to go with PySide since it's fairly flexible, and I just like to work with PySide, and we can separate the interface from some logic, from some signals, and it's a little bit more straightforward for me and organized to do this in separate files rather than having it all together in one bunch of Nuke script file. And it's just my personal preference. But if you do want to do PySide, I would recommend today to do like a first mock-up in the Qt Designer. So I try to do it most of the times. It doesn't work every time, but if it's more complex, I would go for just doing an interface mockup to see yourself how all these kind of things look like. Doesn't mean that it's like that's the solution forever, but it gives you a first impression, and you can just code away and don't have to decide why you're coding, where to place all these things. So I made this kind of basic windows, and I thought, okay, if we have different knobs, it would be cool to have knobs and values listed in the table. So the idea was to, let me just run this real quick so we can enter the values. That's the cool thing. You get a preview. You can see your selection behaviors, and it actually gives you a pretty good idea where it's going afterwards. So my idea was to have something like this in the front, and in the second row, let's say with a defined delimiter, like that's the value list, and the second row would be something like this, and then again arbitrary numbers, something like this. So we have a two-dimensional array where I can just define knob values as a user interface, and then the only thing what happens afterwards was I need to somehow define a write node as well, since I want to render out and I have to access this kind of write node. And my first simple approach was to select the write node and lock it, so we have it included, and the panel knows also about the write node and can pass the information later on to the actual model, which does the rendering. That's the idea. I think it's not ideal, so this I have to think about it later on in the game. But anyhow, this gives you a very nice idea to how your interface will look like. Then you can just start to play around and add more radio buttons, whatever you fancy, just to give you a quick idea. So I can recommend this one to do this very first. And then you see, okay, I have my radio button, I have my checkbox. So this is how it would look like if I would add widgets like this. All right, so we got the objects modeling inside Python without any Nuke so far. So what I did then is to create a view, which is just a coding representation of the stuff that you've seen just in the designer, which is a little bit more complex, and there's some stuff happening already, but I don't want to go into too much detail. I think there's some tutorials about PySide and PyQt. So I wrote everything in PySide 2, of course. I try to stick with Python 3 since I just want to prepare for Nuke 13 and later on. And I just create signals that I can just grab later on in the controller and just pass it over to the model. So how does it look like later on in Nuke? So I have this kind of shop, and this is an empty table like we have seen before. It's not laid out perfectly, but it's just a starting point. And my idea was to not manually add rows. So the idea was to use the drag and drop behavior from Nuke, and you can, as you link knobs, you can just use control, take the knob and just drop it into the table, and then you get your node and knob value, and then you can just enter here the value. So let's say 1, 2, 5, and 10. And now this would be my variant with a list of ranges covered like this. And then I would simply say, hey, create and close, and then it just render those wedges. And let me bring them in. I don't know why it's not closing. So this the code is not very clean yet. So I have 1, 2, and another wedge. Haven't I thought for Let me just check real quick. So this is the number. I just want to make sure that I actually have the right amount. I can't really remember what I typed in. So those are the 3. Okay, let me just delete those, the file system real quick. So this should be empty now, okay. And now let me just start over again, just to make sure. So if I select the right node, it gets filled out already. So now I have like 5, 2, 5, and 10. Maybe a 4th one just to make sure. It should be rendering. Damn it. Okay. Well, I've did so far. So it's actually good to see the issues during the process. So of course there's a still frame as a fixed path, and normally I, as a starting point, I have a placeholder called IDX for index, so I can, while I'm iterating through those things, I can increase the index, so I can just fill out the file path. Otherwise, it could, of course, overrides all the time, and that's exactly what happened now, because I haven't really set the code up that it reverts to the original file name afterwards. Then, of course, it takes a second one. So now with the index, so one more try, like this. So let's say 1, 3, 5, 10. To this aside a little bit so you can see this. So at least it's doing things 4 times. And now we have 4 renderings, which, yes, so, which is this one. You see that's the index right now, that's the 3, and if you look at this one, you have the 2, the 3, 1 and 0. Would be nice later on to have some more information, so my thought was about it to have some more in the metadata, just to punch in all the different wedge values in the metadata and just have them accessible later on, so I can see an image and I just display the wedge values and even perhaps recreate those values inside the script. But that's more than like 1-2 diaries ahead, so it just shows that here. Okay. This seems to work. That's the basic thing. I'm still not entirely sure about the table, since I somehow have the feeling that's a little bit annoying with the separation, with the manual entering. So I have to think about it and maybe potentially setting up as a different widget, because this one seems fine, but as soon as you will enter, let's say you want to have a display or like a value, RGB values, then it's going to be difficult to enter. And then if you want to have, I would like to have the option to have a range, like, hey, I want to have 10 values from 55 to 83. Just do your magic and calculate the steps between. So this could be also difficult in here. So I might change this, but as a first step and see how it looks like, fair enough. So this might do the trick as a beginning. And again, it's a work in progress, so we will see that. So I think that's it, and I will think about having different widgets and more advanced options inside the widget itself. Till next time.